Okay, this video is landscape art, just to share with you some of this beautiful art, because there's a tradition of art in sort of Western society, and it's magnificent, and people should be aware of it, because I think a lot of young people, they grow up and they see all this garbage in modern art, and it makes it hard for them to realize how much great art there is. And for a young person who wants to learn how to draw, and it's one of the best hobbies they could have because they can carry it with them their entire life, they have to see the great work to know what to compare to, what to strive to. So anyways, Frederick Edwin Church is one of the greatest landscape artists of all time. This painting is above the clouds at sunrise, and I'm kind of also showing it here in the sense like the beginning of life on Earth. And then here is Among the Sierra Nevada Mountains by Albert Bierstadt, 1868. And this is just an awesome painting. I think it's probably the most beautiful landscape painting ever made. And there's really two versions of it. This is sort of a twilight or nighttime version of it. And here's more of a daytime or morning version of it. And one can see how, the deer coming up to the edge of the water just adds more life to it. It's just magnificent. Like Yosemite, it's magnificent. And you have a sense of God in the light and the nature, the beauty of it. It's just amazing. Okay, here is a painting called Tiger at Dawn. This is by Robert Bateman. Robert Bateman is the greatest nature artist who ever lived. He's got lots of great paintings. I own a bunch of his books. They're just magnificent. I mean, look at that. How great is that? Okay, here's another painting by Frederick Edwin Church. And this one is Niagara Falls. Just the power and the majesty of nature. It's magnificent. And I was up there. I saw it in person, and it's just like this. Okay, here's a nice painting. This is called Morning in the Forest by Ivan Shishkin. He was a Russian artist. This was painted in 1889, and that's the point I'm making. The Russians back in the 1800s, even though 90% of them were serfs or slaves, at least their aristocracy, was primarily Christian and made beautiful art. This is just beautiful. And you had all the great writers. You had Pushkin and Dostoevsky and Gogol, and you had Turgenev, and I don't really like Tolstoy, but he was talented. So that's what Russia could do. And there was other painters that were great in Russia in the 1800s. Once Russia went communism in the 1900s, they didn't produce any art. So anyways, I thought this was just a cute, nice painting and shows what Russia was capable of in the 1800s. Okay, here of course is the all-time greatest painting of all time, The Creation of Adam on the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. What's also interesting about it is notice that Michelangelo stinks at landscapes. Almost always his landscapes are a whole lot of nothing. The painting's magnificent. And you can see here, this is actually a picture of a brain. You can see here's the frontal lobe. This would be the sylvian fissure. Here's the temporal lobe. This is almost like a stalk extending downward to the pituitary gland. And that's Eve sort of being delivered to Adam, if you will. Here's the occipital lobe. This would be the parietal lobe up here. So extraordinary. This is the best painting of Adam and Eve, this one by Jan Bruegel and Peter Paul Rubin from 1615. So, again, I think that's the way to go in life, like Adam and Eve, but with indoor heating and plumbing. It's just beautiful. All right, now here's a series of paintings about the individual voyage of life, it's called. The Voyage of Life by Thomas Cole. And he's from the Hudson Valley School of Art. And you can see the baby being born is with mama, a time of joy and abundance coming out of the birth canal here from the cave. And everything's green. It's morning time in paradise. And now here's youth. So youth is full of vigor, like a young man aspiring towards his dream ideal of the future in the sky. And he's got calm waters sailing out. He doesn't even wave goodbye to mom. He's so happy and excited. But the reality of the painting and how subtlety is, you can see as the water goes around the turn, it now starts heading into the rapids. And that's what real life is like. Kids go off to college or go off to other things, and it's a little more challenging than they expected. But still, it's a magnificent painting. He's the best story painter ever lived. And then here's a sad painting. I just sort of added this one into the series here. This is Ophelia by John Everett Millais. He's part of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood of Painters in England in the mid-1800s, the Victorian age. And, you know, John Ruskin had greatly supported them with his magnificent speech, the greatest speech ever in the history of art and art criticism, 1853. John Ruskin on the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. So anyways, this, of course, is Ophelia from the play Hamlet. How sad she became when sort of Hamlet rejected her when he was kind of going crazy with all his own personal difficulties. And this painting is just so magnificent. I mean, look at the detail in the whole environment around her. There actually was a story attached to the painting whereby it was a lady posing for the picture in his bathtub, and the burners went out to heat the water, and she caught a cold, and he had to pay her extra for that. Okay, so now back to the voyage of life. This is middle age. So we saw birth and youth, and now we're in middle age. You can see the guardian angel, Mama's farther away, and the boat now is going over the rapids. The oars have fallen out, and he's just praying, hoping things will turn out okay. And a lot of people have crises and, you know, midlife crises, and hopefully he'll navigate these rocks in the rapids. But I think it's a magnificent painting of just sort of like what life is like. Now here's the last of the paintings in this series, Voyage of Life by Thomas Cole from the 1830s. This is old age. The waters are calm. The guardian angel's coming closer to him again. Another angel sort of leading him up to heaven. And it's beautiful. All right, so a little more on Thomas Cole, the great art. I made a video about him once, just Thomas Cole alone, as an art hero. And his painting really goes with the philosophy and writings of this historian, Giovanni Battista Vico. So Vico's cyclical theory of history. And he'll emphasize that a society gets built up by its importance of appreciating its families, and then its religion, and that it will then go through phases. It'll start out almost bestial in a barbaric phase. Then they go through an age of gods, which is often written by the poets, like in ancient Greek. Like Hesiod's Theogony, the age of the gods. It'll progress then towards more age of heroes, and that's more macho, like the Iliad and the Odyssey within Greek history, if you will. Men like Achilles, you know, the war hero of the Iliad, and Odysseus, a little more of a clever hero, but still sort of that masculine, macho hero. The next thing comes is the age of man, like in ancient Greece, that would be like with Socrates and Plato, mocking the sophists, and Socrates to some extent, and Plato trying to replace the old physical heroes, like Achilles, if you will, especially, with this new idea of a modern hero, with Socrates sort of being the intellectual hero of Plato's dialogues. But the problem is, if you mock and criticize the gods and the traditions, society will start to fall apart. So Vico had said that the nature of a people is at first crude, then severe, let's say like the Puritans, then benign, then delicate and soft, and finally the fall of the country as they become decadent and incompetent and weak, like a dodo bird, feminized dodo bird. Vico continues, once reason becomes skeptical and critical, it eliminates superstition and religion. And what happens is the atheists come in and they rewrite history, and they mock the religion and say untrue, bad things about it, make it worse than its problems ever were. And this is done to change the minds of the youth, and then the society collapses. That's a pretty typical thing. Because you look at Voltaire, he was clever, yes, he was funny, but he sort of, encouraged the other philosophes, atheists, like Rousseau, for example, his style of philosophy, and that led to the destruction of France, around 1789, 1793. It's the social cooperation of the way religion means like religare, like ligate in Latin, to tie things together, to hold the people together, and that gets them to get along and cooperate. Every weekend they meet at their church, and some of them will talk to each other, maintain friendships, and help each other out. Okay, so Cole then made a series of paintings called The Collapse of Empire to go with Vico's cyclical theory of history. And again, Vico says, once the energizing myth or religion is lost, it gets replaced by a barren intellectualism. And then they rename things, like the philosophers like Rousseau, his category of historians, they renamed their own age the Enlightenment, like they're smarter than everybody in the past, and then they'll call the early Middle Ages, they'll call it the Dark Ages to imply that it was all dark and stupid. But a lot of progress was actually made in the early Middle Ages. And then here's a quote from Vico: "A society will not restore itself until it reestablishes its faith in God." People don't understand. They need God more than God needs them. All right? And when people turn their back on God, they just fall apart. They can't hold it together. You can't create a meaningful, workable metaphysics if you don't have a God-based worldview. Okay? Otherwise, it doesn't hold together. What an individual thinks doesn't really matter, but what society thinks as a group really does matter a lot. So Vico had noticed there were people like Descartes who he felt was atheists, and that was causing, he felt, the potential destruction of society. Okay, in America, we've had the different ages. We had the age of the gods with the Puritans, the age of heroes with men like George Washington, who was the Cincinnatus, the great historian that after he'd won against the British, he sort of turned over control, gave it back to the politicians. And then there were other great heroic men like MacArthur and Patton and Chesty Puller. And America's now in sort of this age of man where it's mocking its traditions and its history, and it's becoming decadent and immoral, and it's falling apart, and it's not clear what's going to happen. Okay, this is sort of the cycle of paintings. This was actually a separate series, but they all go together. So here's Arcadia, Pastoral Scene by Thomas Cole. And I kind of got those out of order. Actually, the bestial phase, savage phase of Thomas Cole would come before the Arcadia, but you get the drift. So again, he's showing sort of man, but when he's a little more primitive. And just here's another beautiful nature painting by Thomas Cole. This is Oxbow Lake in Connecticut, Oxbow River. It's just beautiful. He's like the best story painter that ever lived, this guy Thomas Cole. Oh, one other lady, it's good to know about her. This is Bev Doolittle, and she's just a magnificent artist. And she does all kinds of subtle things. Even sometimes it's called camouflage art, where she'll have like hidden characters within her landscapes and stuff. You can see the snow reflecting onto the water, looks like an eagle. And she does lots of very clever things. I own some of her books, and they're beautiful. So she's a great contemporary artist, lady artist. Okay, here, continuing with Thomas Cole, sort of telling the story of the frontiersman now. He's got his own little house, he's fishing and holding things together for the family. Farming gradually gets more sophisticated. You got horse-pulled carriages, and you can then plant and harvest bigger pieces of land. This is the Hay Wain by Constable, 1821. And here's just an interesting painting, almost like a French Impressionism. This is Vincent van Gogh, the sower, planting his crops, and rather startling sunshine there. You can feel the heat. Here's another agricultural painting from Pieter Bruegel, 1565, The Harvesters. And I can tell you, these are all sort of like really great paintings or masterpieces. And for each one of these, there's like 100 other good ones. And you just get a sense that this is a typical life of a peasant, doing manual labor all day. But the nice thing about peasants is they have a lot more social interaction with each other. And one sort of sees that in the modern world as well. A lot of the high-tech persons are by themselves most of the day. I spend a lot of my time by myself just cranking out intellectual work, and it's kind of nice. Sometimes I miss the social aspect of like when I was younger. Okay, here then is society's progressing towards more complex, sophisticated cities, and this is a beautiful painting, View of Toledo by El Greco, 1596, and it's both a landscape painting and an architecture painting, but there's almost a surreal sense of the landscape, and it adds a sort of supernatural, godlike presence. And as man had more leisure time because there were more sophisticated methods of farming, he could then pursue intellectual quests. And I love this painting, Sadak in Search of the Waters of Forgetting, by John Martin, 1812. So you can basically see him climbing little hill after hill, obstacle after obstacle to work his way to the top, which reminds me very much of an intellectual quest. So Sadak, great painting. And here, of course, is the great Isaac Newton, 1665, Anno Mirabilis, the miracle year, when he was home in the family cottage after he just graduated from Oxford. And here he is looking at the apple, and this is where he figured out the laws of thermodynamics, invented calculus, and did the basic work on optics. And it was like the greatest year by an individual ever in the history of the world intellectually. He's the smartest person who ever lived, super religious and devout. And that's the other thing people forget, that science actually came from Christianity. The modern scientific method of hypothesis, experiment, analysis, potential adjustment hypothesis. And so, men like Newton developed the technology that could then be harnessed to later on make more sophisticated things like this locomotive here. And this is a painting of Arnold Freeberg. He painted a lot of paintings of the Canadian Mounties and whatnot. And his paintings are really spectacular, very strong, and sort of joyful, triumphant, and energetic. He's a great artist. Okay, now back to Thomas Cole, and this is sort of now, the previous Voyage of Life was about the life of an individual. Now this is more about the life of a society. It starts out with the architect's dream. So the architect imagines that he could create something magnificent like these buildings, sort of your old classic Greco-Roman architecture, as well as right here is sort of a cathedral as well. And it's quite beautiful. And then the society reaches consummation, where the architect's dream has come true, and he's built this incredible city, like a city on a hill, like the Greek Acropolis, like the idea of Christianity, a light on a hill, a lamp on a hill that can guide others. And it's magnificent, and if only man could hold it together. But what tends to happen, sadly, is he starts drifting away from his religion, drifting more into decadence. And sadly, the next phase in Vico's cycle of history is a destructive phase, where there's strife and violence, sometimes foreign invasion, sometimes just a loss of religion and a collapse of the people. If you look at, you can read like the Old Testament, for example. If people move away from their faith in God, things get worse for them. When people are closer and more appreciative to God, things are better for them. And so, the way it kind of works, and it's been this way ever, any people, they turn their back on God, God's more likely to turn his back on them. And so religion's an important thing for people. It gets them to behave better, gets them to help each other more, be more unified. Without it, a lot of times you end up in chaos. So this is sad. You can see the chaos happening in this picture here. And this is how that magnificent society ended up. This is the desolation phase, sort of at the end of the cycle, and then you go back to the bestial phase. So what a sad destruction this is. Okay, now here is Thomas Kinkade, like, half the dome here. It reminds me like El Capitan, half dome and El Capitan. They remind me of it. Yosemite. This is Thomas Kinkade. He's like an American artist, the greatest selling painter of all time. And I have a bunch of his books. They're very beautiful. He has a website you can go to and buy paintings from him or buy the books from him. They're very beautiful. And the reason why he sells so many paintings is he paints what people like. People have a nostalgic sense of all this stuff. And, the environment, the nature, it's all just beautiful. The cathedrals are the most beautiful buildings ever made. Here's one, Salisbury Cathedral by John Constable, 1825. This is a Protestant cathedral. It probably was a Catholic cathedral, but later on Protestantism came in. The French cathedrals are better. They're the best as the French cathedrals, but it's still beautiful. Oh, sorry about this. I had a double there. I didn't mean to have that in there. Okay, so here's sort of the twilight of all the things we just talked about. Twilight in the Wilderness by Frederick Edwin Church, 1860. He actually has another version of this painting where he made the sky look like the American flag. It's rather beautiful. And so we started this talk with sunrise, and here's sunset. And now we're going to actually go into a little bit of a different topic with landscape art. We're going to go towards winter in a moment here. Just one painting here, Starry, Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. A nice, interesting, unusual take on the sky at night and the stars. And then here is the Wanderer Above the Sea Fog, Caspar David Friedrich. And this idea of, as you see the back of the character, I think it's called something like a Rockenfurger or something like that. And the gist of it being that you put yourself into the painting. It's almost if you are looking forward into the painting. And I like this idea of having a bird's eye view of a situation, like from that proverb metaphor of six blind men and an elephant. This is like the bird's eye view. And here's a painting called Woods in the Snow by Peter Mork Monstedt, Danish painter from 1900. And I'm simply showing these paintings to get an idea of how magnificent this art is, and to realize what you got. Because if a society, doesn't preserve its great achievements, it loses them. And I don't want that to happen. So anyways, beautiful painting. Here's another beautiful painting, Hunters in the Snow by Bruegel, 1565. Everybody's had a day walking in the snow and can remember something like this. And the people are happy and skating around. And here's one of the all-time great paintings by Arnold Freiberg. This is George Washington at Valley Forge. And it was a tough time. I recently reread a couple books on the life of George Washington and those times, 1776, and the Dugard version of it with Bill O'Reilly and whatnot. And man, George Washington, he had it really tough. I mean, it was a close thing, America versus the British. They almost lost multiple times. He had to flee in the middle of the night not to lose his whole army several different times. And he was out there in the front, and he was, he had his horse get shot out from under him. He was wounded sometimes. He had his friends, other generals killed. It was a very close call and rather scary. And if it wasn't for the French, they would have been screwed. So many times he was almost trapped by the British. It's a remarkable story. It's very entertaining too. And anyways, I love this painting. He was a religious guy, and he was just trying to hold it together. Many times he had no money to pay their troops, and they were desperate, and guys were deserting. Their time of being signed in would end, and he would all of a sudden lose, large percentages of his army, and it was a very close call all the way. Surprisingly suspenseful. Okay, here's just another beautiful, winter scene here with Kincaid's chapel. This is called Deer Creek, and again, there's lots of books of Tom Kincaid paintings, and they're magnificent. I really like them. Oh, here's just one last Thomas Kincaid, The Spirit of Christmas. And this is what Christmas was like for me growing up. This is the best time of the year. Everybody's so happy. Anybody who's away at school or something comes home for Christmas. You see all your friends and relatives, your old girlfriend if you're far away from her. It's the best time of the whole year, by far. Okay, now just showing, this is Caspar David Friedrich. Again, we got the Ruckenfurger, whatever you want to call it, looking from the back of the person in. And here's another one of Caspar David Friedrich. And this reminds me of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, heading to the ghost of Christmas future. So hopefully we don't want this to be the future of America, sort of desolate and sad. I hope we don't come to this. And this totally reminds it. Again, The Ghost of Christmas Future. It's actually called Oakwood. I think Chapel in the Oakwood or something by Caspar David Friedrich. And again, this totally reminds me of The Ghost of Christmas Future, Charles Dickens. And so hopefully we can see where America's going and steer her away from this plight. And here's a remarkable painting called Anguish by August Friedrich Schenk from 1878. It's incredible the amount of drama he portrays just with a bunch of sheep and a bunch of birds or a bunch of crows. It's rather remarkable. And his next painting's even better. Here it is, where he basically has all the sheep are caught in a snowstorm, in a blizzard. And the dogs are trying to protect them, but there's not much the dogs can do. The wolves are coming in from the periphery, and the only thing that can save them is to rally to the cross and help each other out. And that's kind of like where America's at right now. It's either going to, have a religious revival and people are going to be nice to each other and help each other with, a biblical worldview that mankind is created in the image of God, and, have Christian ethics of be nice to each other, forgive each other, get along, or it's going to go to communism and just be a terrible, sad, messed up place. And I hope that doesn't happen, but we're at a turning point, and I hope it ends up getting better, There's hope. Here's a beautiful landscape, again, by Caspar David Friedrich. And, look, it doesn't matter what an individual does, but it matters what society does. And I can see that this is the hope for society. I can care less what some other individual does. That's their own personal business. But as a society, if we don't have Christian ethics, we're going to have atheist, Darwinism, communist ethics, and those are not nice, and nobody's going to like it. So it's not like, maybe it would be nice if there were other choices, but I don't think there realistically are. And anyways, I hope things get better. So anyways, I hope you enjoy that art and realize that's real beautiful art. All this modern art is fake. So just know what the good stuff is and share it with people who you'd like to. I hope that was interesting.